I want to talk about something in NASCAR again. Boy, that's a surprise. But a lot's been made in the media of Kevin Harvick being a lame duck driver for Richard Childress Racing during this 2013 season. Now, Harvick started out just fine, winning the Sprint, whatever they're calling it. I still call it the Busch Clash. I'm old school. It was the Busch Clash Bud Shootout for years. But winning the race for the pole winners, let's call it. Alright, that started out pretty well, but let's go back to some that didn't end so well. Some that did, some that didn't. Now, there's different types of lame duck drivers. Let's say in a few years, Jeff Gordon says before the start of the year, goes to Mr. H and says, Rick, this is it. This is my last year. Now, that's totally different because he's not leaving to go to another team. I'm not saying he's going to retire. Don't try to get me starting any rumors, because I'm not, but I mean, hopefully he'll have a good retirement and all that. But let's go back to, let's discuss two Hall of Famers lame duck year in 1980. Cale Yarborough, after 8 years with Junior Johnson, wanted to run a part-time schedule. Junior Johnson was not set up to do that. Cale went to the MC Anderson team and had some success for a couple years before moving on to Harry Vernier and winning Daytona back-to-back in 83 and 84. Now, Cale finished out the season strong in 1980. He finished second in points to Dale Earnhardt, was in it right down to the last race for the championship, so not a bad year, not the greatest year, but, second in points. There'd be a bunch of drivers that trade places with him. Now let's look at Darrell Waltrip, who had a stormy relationship at times with Dyart owner Bill Gardner. He literally bought his contract out, and that was not a good ending. He won it out in 78. Gardner said, "You're under contract, boy. You can't go nowhere." Well, they finally decided to resolve it, and Waltrip had a fairly good year in 79, finishing second in points, but it went downhill in 80. They fired the crew chief before the start of the 80 season. They rehired him, and then they fired him during the season. But that was Waltrip in those days. Now, let's go to trying to remember when Junior left the company formerly known as DEI. Was it? I think he went to Hendrick in 2008, but don't quote me on that. I'm pretty sure of that. But they went through a bunch of motors that year in Junior's car. They were using the Childress Earnhardt engines, or Earnhardt Childress engines. Was he just not getting the best stuff? It makes you wonder. I mean, they were fastest car on the track at Martinsville, and they were on 7 cylinders. He couldn't spin the tires like some of them were, before it finally blew up and come close to making a chase even before the motor blew up in Richmond. But so sometimes it's good. But let's talk about Harvick is going to Stewart-Haas Racing. So here's the question: where does that, if GoDaddy stays and they want Danny Kirkpatrick in the car, where does that put Ryan Newman? Well, the most obvious place would look to be Childress, except for one thing. Kevin Harvick and Jeff Burton were just keeping the seats warm for the Dillon brothers. Now, Paul Menard is with Childress. If Paul Menard wants to stay there, he can write his own ticket, because it's no coincidence that the sponsor on the car and the driver's last name's the same. Most NASCAR fans know that's the family's company that's on the car. They basically bought him a ride. I did a whole vlog on rich kid drivers, including him. Jeff Burton, could he decide to retire after this year? If he retires, I'll look for Newman maybe to go to the third Childress car for 1 or 2 years till they get Ty Dillon ready. I mean, it's pretty obvious Austin Dillon's going to be in the ride vacated by Harvick, probably as the number 3. They'll probably change the numbers. I'll have to get new sponsors, because I understand that Budweiser and Jimmy John's is going with Harvick to Stewart-Haas, which would give him 3 pretty well sponsored teams. But it just, This lame duck driver bit, I don't know. Actually, when Kurt Busch went ahead and got in the 78 car at the end of last year, when Furniture Row and Reagan Smith parted ways, I thought that was a good move. Reagan Smith could pursue other opportunities. Looks like he's going to be, I'd say, a contender for the championship in the Nationwide Series, but getting back. I do not look for Harvick to have a good year. Yeah, he won the Bud Shootout, and he could win a race. I mean, Talladega seems to be a place for lame duck drivers. Clint Boyer in a Childers car as a lame duck won the fall race, and Matt Kenseth in a Roush car last year won the fall race at Talladega, but it's usually not a good ending unless it's a retirement or something like Cale Yarborough leaving Junior Johnson to run a partial schedule. And a side note on that, a lot of people don't know this because Cale Yarborough and Darrell Waltrip feuded. But Cale Yarborough, before that became public, went to Darrell Waltrip in 1980 and said, "Boy, get out of your contract. I'm leaving the 11 car. You need to get in it." And at the time, that was the ride you wanted to be in, much like getting in a Hendrick car today. That's just been kind of my take on the lame duck driver deal.